London Rio. He's also running, by the way, for mayor of London. Brian Rose, you know a lot about Wall Street. We'll bring you into the show here. But also, you know about media. And one of the important things about that the professor was saying, and I think this is a key issue, you know, the idea here that these Wall Street bets guys, basically on Reddit and Discord, found a way to get around the system. A lot of that has to do with being able to utilize new media and utilize these chat areas that they haven't had access to, because the idea of using media to manipulate stock price is nothing new. It happens on CNBC pretty much every day, does it not?
Yeah, Ben, it's a great question. First of all, thanks for having me. And again, I have to say, I'm not normally in the back of a bus, but I'm actually on a digital campaign bus that I'm driving around London. I'll talk more about that later. But, you know, I've been using media for the past 10 years. And when I was on Wall Street back in 93, there wasn't this new media form. And like you said, the information was usually passed between Wall Street experts, maybe television at the time. Now we're seeing all sorts of things come together with this latest GameStop issue. But one of them is the social media, empowering millions of people to go in and buy even one or two shares, and it's changing the game. I think those SEC regulations that I learned to get my Series 7 exam back in the day, they were built for the industrial age, not for the information age. I think we need to really look at a lot of those regulations and find out, do we regulate social media or do we not? Should we allow these people to do what they have to do? There's a lot of questions here. I'm still undecided on the exact way forward.
One of the things I've seen in terms of narratives that seems to be shifting, and by the way, I just got to say, you're our first guest to come live from a bus, by the way, and it looks fantastic. Great look. We may do it next week for me. The idea that when we're talking about manipulation, there seems to be a new narrative being pushed right now, and that is that, guess what? All these Reddit guys and all these folks from Wall Street Bets, they thought they were sticking it to the man. They thought they were screwing over Wall Street. But in fact, there were some hedge funds that owned GameStop stock, and therefore they actually helped Wall Street. And that seems to be the new narrative. And it feels to me very disingenuous, almost to the idea of saying, see, if you do this, you're helping Wall Street, so you didn't accomplish anything. But the point wasn't just to stick it to Wall Street, was it?
I mean, look, they talk about the winners and losers and who's the hero and who's the bad guy. I mean, this is stock speculation. And in my time that I spent on Wall Street and in the city of London here, it always ends in tears, you know? There's literally a zero-sum game here. Someone wins and someone loses. So I don't see any heroes here. Again, I see a bunch of individual investors who have now felt what it's like to own a share. Maybe they stuck it to the hedge fund guys, maybe temporarily, but it's just supply and demand. It's a short squeeze. We've seen it for 100 years in the stock market. This one's just playing out now with all these new individual investors, social media, and now there happens to be the bad guy in this situation that makes for a great narrative. You know, I don't know if that's really the way we're going to look at this situation 6 months from now. Again, I think it ends in tears ultimately because it's stock speculation. This is not investment. This is not necessarily creation. These are people getting their feet wet. And that's what I think the positive is. I think it's good when teenagers own a share of stock because they'll understand their financial future, their IRA accounts, which normally they would have never bothered with. So I do think there's a plus here, but I don't think they're sticking it to the Wall Street bad guys. That's not how this will fall out.
Well, and I think you're making a good point too, that this idea that it's all about winners and losers and more importantly, heroes and villains, right? That the way media loves to shape everything is that there's a hero and there's a villain. And so you've got to be one or the other. And typically we always know how it shakes out, right? Ultimately, you know, the Wall Street guys and specifically the cronies who back them up through government, in this case, I think Janet Yellen, will always say that the true heroes were the establishment, and these other folks were they were trouble causers, or that they duped you into believing something that ultimately wasn't true. Do you think there will be greater regulation now as a result of this that prevents this from happening in the future?
Well, you know, one of my favorite movies is Wall Street, and one of my favorite characters is Gordon Gekko. And he said to Bud Fox, the most valuable commodity I know of is information. And we're seeing that play out right now. When I joined Wall Street in 93, I quickly saw on the 33rd floor of the Bankers Trust building right next to the World Trade Center when it was still there, how the lack of information for our clients made us a lot of money. And we've slowly seen that deteriorate over the years, Ben, until now we actually have a collective that can be proactive and move forward as a group. And it's a very interesting time. I can see why the Fed is uncomfortable. I can see why they're crying out. They're trying to protect these individual investors, but I also don't buy it. I think for the first time we're seeing information almost democratized. and now we're seeing this collective group work together. Now, are they colluding? Is that illegal in the stock market? These are interesting questions we have to ask. And it's going to be interesting how this plays out. Like you said, all the current Fed members are probably ex-Wall Street people. And so there's a lot of conflicts of interest going on here.
Let's just go back to what was being said there. I mean, again, I think it comes down to the terminology that we use and how you define certain things. I mean, can you define a hedge fund as collusion? Can you define, any of those types of steps? But then when we talk about market manipulation, what does that look like? I mean, when a CEO of a company goes on to CNBC, for instance, and talks about how all hotels are going to go to zero because of the pandemic, then turns around and his company buys stock in hotels when they go crashing down, I mean, isn't that market manipulation at its very core? And how is that treated differently than what we're seeing right now?
Those are great points you make, Ben. I think what we need to do is look at this through the lens of what I call new media. And people think that YouTube, which is where we're streaming right now, is just television on demand, but it's not actually. It's a completely different medium. Marsh McLuhan famously said the medium is the message, and we don't actually know what this is yet because we can interact with it, we can comment, we can share. And that's what we've seen with this GameStop story, where people can in real time share information and then they can see themselves winning and then double down on the stock. And so it's something I've experienced in the last 10 years in this new media. We saw Elon Musk do it with his Twitter feed. And so we need to really think about completely new rules and regulations now that everyone has the power of their phones in this immediate time. And it's something I've spent the last 10 years getting to know. And I'm actually using the same process out here on the campaign trail, literally speaking with citizens as I drive by their homes in a COVID-safe manner. And we're flipping the script on democracy and almost letting the little guy win again. So I think there's a bigger discussion to have here about how we regulate, because these social media networks and sharing media, it's only going to exponentially grow, and we're going to have the next version of the GameStop soon. So I think we have to really reevaluate all these regulations. I mean, let's be honest. They were made back in 1932 when they looked at the stock market crash of 29, trying to protect the little guy, but they've been warped and moved around by the big guys since. Now it's time to change the game, level the playing field. We're seeing it in stock markets. We're seeing it here now with democracy in London. I think we need to really look at this through a new lens.
You made an interesting point there about Elon Musk. His one tweet from him can completely shift the market in terms of showing support for something, encouraging something. When you talk about the cryptocurrency, it does the same thing, right? The Dogecoin that he specifically mentioned in a tweet. I don't even know if he mentioned it by name. I think he just put up a picture of it. And then all of a sudden we saw a 900% increase in the value of that coin in 24 hours, right? Because people said, oh, Elon's in on it. And so you're absolutely right that there is a completely different game being played when you have that power, but it does democratize, as you said, to some extent, this idea. Because again, this has been happening for a long time. The question is, does the little guy ultimately get hurt through this? You were talking about speculation ending in tears. I think most people who know enough about the market know that is the reality of it. The only way that you ultimately walk out of there with something is if you own the house. The house always wins, right? And that's what I think we've seen on Wall Street for a long time. Tell me about how this is all being played in London and the view of it there. Are they as open to this idea of democratizing the system, or are people there stepping back and saying, this is nuts what's going on in the US?
Well, I mean, first of all, the house always wins. And like I said, I worked at Bankers Trust in New York City. And when I was in London, I worked as an interdealer broker. So I was literally the middleman putting together major global banks at the same time. I always went home with a paycheck, but the other counterparties didn't always do it. And over a long enough timeline, just like in Vegas, Ben, the house will win. And I think maybe that's the education that a lot of these new, younger investors are going to get, that it's not all fun and games. And you see the guys with the yachts and success stories. I've had Jordan Belfort on my show. That ended in tears as well. And so I think we need to understand that. But it's a great time for education. But we have to ask these questions. Elon Musk sends out a tweet. Is that illegal? What if he had a private WhatsApp group with 10,000 people? Now, that's not public. So is that legal? We have to start asking our questions about this new media. And we are really taking this to the edge now with our campaign here in London, because again, we're supposed to, not be out campaigning, but we found a COVID secure manner of doing it. I'm driving this bus. I've driven it 1,000 miles through 32 boroughs, and I'm live streaming with the voters answering their questions as they literally see me go by their homes. And for the first time ever, the little guy is actually winning against the two-party system and their mainstream media cohorts. And for the first time, independent candidate with no corporate donations, no backroom deals, we're in second place to become the next mayor of London. So I see parallels here. I think this freaks everyone out. It does, especially the old school, right? Because they are protecting their old way of doing things, whether it's politics or Wall Street or the City of London. They never like it because they're the house and the game is rigged. But as we've seen over the past few decades, they're going to have to give a little back and allow this stuff to happen. I think it's exciting what's going forward. And the people that master digital will master the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much pressure rising in the system right now. How do you hold that down? Brian Rose, good luck to you. Thanks so much for being a part of this and being on the show today. And good luck in that swanky bus of yours. It's fantastic.
Hey, thanks so much, Ben. May 6th, we're going to make it happen here. I appreciate you. Thank you.
May 6th. We'll keep an eye on it. Thank you.